Well, I'm really privileged tonight to have an opportunity to introduce Dr. Bill Pettit to my colleagues. It's been such a joy to know Bill over the last 34 years, and we have a lot of commonalities. Um, I'll just begin by explaining a little bit about Bill's background and say that he graduated from Creighton University, which is in my home state of Nebraska. Then he graduated with his MD from Illinois. And that, yes. Hello? I guess I better manage my participants. Mute everybody but me. Let's see here. Okay, so everybody's muted except you and me, Bill, at this point in time. I was about to say that he was a naval flight surgeon and was involved in the Naval Aerospace Medical Institute in Pensacola in Florida. And Bill and I both studied at the Advanced Human Studies Institute in Coral Gables, Florida. And it was there that he got a psychotherapy fellowship in innate mental health. He's also board certified, double board certified in both psychiatry and neurology, as well as adolescent psychiatry, with further advanced qualifications in psychosomatic medicine and geriatrics psychiatry. So we're in good hands tonight with Dr. Bill Pettit. He has an additional certification that I'd love to mention in regard to the Three Principles Foundation. He received a certificate of competency to teach the three principles as discovered and taught by Sydney Banks. So Bill, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Welcome, thank you, thank you. Well, I take it that we have some people who know about the three universal principles of mind, thought, and consciousness, and others that don't. Am I correct? Okay, I see some nods. Okay. Okay. Well, so I'm going to. I think the best way is to assume that, or to talk to those that haven't had, because otherwise I won't make a lot of sense. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm going to try to do my best to talk for about 40 minutes and then leave time for questions. I sometimes, if I have a group of people that have all been studying or sharing or looking into the three principles, then I'll take questions at the beginning, to see to let people get off what's on their mind. But and I do know that saying that there is one cause for all mental illness and for most physical illness certainly has probably triggered some questions. And I would be glad to take two or three. I don't want to take a lot of our time, but to have, if it would relieve you and let you just take it off your mind and put it on my back burner as I speak. Is that okay, Lynn, if we just see if...
And you can unmute yourselves. I've muted everybody, but you can unmute yourselves on the left lower corner.
Okay. People have to, some questions just on your mind from what you know or what just even the little blip that we had on one cause. Or maybe just people want to listen.
You can also raise your hand in the little box called Manage Participants. There's a raise your hand function, I think. So here's one, Bill. It's just a single word, and that word is stress.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me say to this as we start, because I'm going to say a lot of things that for a lot of people may be really way outside of the way that they think of the world, and so I'm going to say a couple of things. One is I'm not asking anybody to believe anything that I say tonight. It's important that you know that, because if you listen to somebody and you just believe what they say, then you've become a follower. And I don't want any followers, and I certainly wouldn't want that. On the other hand, as Mr. Banks used to say, it's okay to be a listener. And if you're willing to listen with an open mind, and you hear something as you listen that touches your place of wisdom that I believe we're all made of, and you see something for yourself, you have a sight from within, an insight, then what you see is not mine, borrowed from me, it's yours. You've owned it. You've had an insight from within. So know that I'm not going to purposely say anything that isn't true to me. I'm going to share things that I have seen in my journey of the last 34 years in having insights into the nature of three universal principles that I'll define. I had an experience last night where someone said you need to define those right off the bat to new people, and even though the depth of what they mean will come from the breadth of the talk. But before I do that, I'm going to ask. We've got some obviously very bright people, people with wonderful intellects, and I'm going to ask you to listen in a way that's somewhat different than you normally listen to a lecture on, well, I'll put it in the math field, like differential calculus, or even in medicine, some complicated thing in medicine regarding in the infectious state or septic shock or whatever, where you really listen for details. I'm going to ask you to listen softly and essentially thank your brain for sharing its comments. And it's okay if you have questions that arise and you want to put them down, please do that. But I'm going to ask you to leave your analytical mind alone as much as possible. You're not going to be deceived. Believe me, there's something much deeper than the analytical mind that'll save you from being deceived by people. One of the most famous scientists of the last 100 years, Einstein, said the following. It's one of my favorite Einstein quotes. Now, see, here's the problem with the video. I can see when people are off in their analytical mind trying to figure things out. That's okay. I'm just making that up anyway. They might be just quiet. So Einstein said, the intuitive mind, what I'll call like wisdom, that manifests, it's a spiritual energy that manifests as thought before in the intellect. He said the intuitive mind, this is Einstein, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. The analytical or rational mind, its faithful servant. However, he said, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Carl Jung also said, although he didn't hear himself, or he wouldn't have had 5-year trainings in Jungian analysis, if he would have really heard what he himself said. Because what Jung said is man will never relieve his problems by his own thinking, but only by revelations of a wisdom beyond his intellect. I'm basically pointing to the same thing that Einstein is pointing. So I'm going to talk about principles. I'm going to talk about the problem, because that's what we said this is going to be, the problem. There's one cause, and I will go into that. And but I'm also going to say that there's one cure, and that the one cure is peace of mind. You'll never find a person with peace of mind with what I define as a mental illness. And I'll be glad to talk about the exceptions when the questions come up that people have. Now, we all die of something eventually. But what the morbidity and mortality worldwide study that was just concluded and had some of you might be familiar with, and a whole series of articles in the Lancet in the UK. It was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates and must have cost them hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know how much it cost, because it spanned 195 countries, and it was incredibly detailed. But what you see is, yes, when you go to sub-Saharan Africa, people are dying of maternal childbirth, and the children are dying of terrible infections and malnutrition and lack of sufficient nutrition. And in the high socioeconomic societies, people are dying of cancers, cardiovascular disease, etc. But it's interesting, when it goes to disability, what they showed is that in the high socioeconomic countries, people are living much longer, but many of those years they are disabled, essentially disabled, with chronic pain and with different problems. And so they have a disability index. And the number of years that people in the upper socioeconomic, the amount of people that the average that spend in disability before they die is disheartening. And I'm going to suggest that that's from chronic mental stress. It's interesting that in 195 countries across all economic strata, all socioeconomic strata, neck pain and back pain were number 1, 2, or 3 in every country in the world. And that comes from chronic mental stress, the muscles being pulled. So, principles. I'm gonna ask you to listen gently and just listen with thinking maybe this old fat psychiatrist might have 1 or 2 things that'll click for me, and be open to the possibility. That's all I'm asking. So the second thing is principles. Principles, the way I'm going to use the term, are if you will, laws. I mean, they're explanatory, elemental understanding to which there are no exceptions. Gravity is one of those principles in physics. There's no exception. And I'm going to talk about that. And so principles are you can take them to the bank. They explain what things are and the way they work. And in any given field, when there are principles discovered, it changes that field. So like in physics, when they found gravity, when they really discovered what gravity really meant, when they discovered even Newton's with thermodynamics, laws of motion, these principles changed that field. In medicine, when Harvey, only like 350 years ago, discovered how circulation worked. We didn't know before that how circulation worked. That the oxygenated blood went to the system, was used by the muscles, etc., in the body, and back through the capillaries to the veins, to the venous system, into the right side of the heart, out to the lung to get oxygen, back to the left side of the heart, and oxygenate it again. We did not know that till 350 years ago. We didn't know how the heart worked and how the whole dynamics worked, so that when people went into shock, does anybody hear, what they did universally is they took blood out. They bloodletted them. Now, if you were in hypervolemic shock, where you had a heart that wasn't working well and you had too much volume, that's why they used Lasix, right? You get the fluid out, so the burden of the heart is lighter, and people got better, but not in septic shock, not in hypovolemic shock. So the vast majority of people died, but some people survived, so that they gave that to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at, I spent 2 years in Chicago, Cheryl, at Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital. I was going to be a heart surgeon. Some people say I still am a heart surgeon without the knife, but I'm trying to heal the heart, huh? I was there at Pres St. Luke's back when it was 36 on and 12 off, and twice a month, 96 out of 108 hours being awake. I mean, my kids, you get their little short violins out when I talk about that, so I won't go on that too much. But to think that before Semmelweis in Vienna, before he discovered that it was the women were not dying of childbirth fever, they were dying of people not washing their hands and then going back in and doing vaginal exams. And that even after he came back, when the death rate went almost to 16%, even though the midwives who weren't doing autopsies only had about 5%, which is still 1 in 20 of young people, but 1 in 6 when he came back from his vacation in the Swiss Alps, because he was about to go crazy because of so many people dying, and he found out that his first assistant had died, and he looked at his autopsy and he said, oh my God, he died of childbirth fever. It had nothing to do with childbirth. It had to do with what we've later come to see as infection. But this was before Lister, and Semmelweis literally had to stand at the door and make people wash their hands because they didn't understand the principles. He had to make them wash their hands. Now, they still didn't change the sheet on the people and the people that had been septic and died, but they eventually did. Halstead and some of those surgeons, they used to sharpen their scalpel on the metal on the bottom of their boot before they opened the belly. Principles, when they're discovered, they change that field. But folks, there's a field that has not had principles. What do I mean? Did people see about the neutron stars that collided last week? Or not collided last week, but we got the signals all over the world from 130 million years ago. Man. These two neutron stars that when they collide, they make gold, platinum, uranium. This is wild. We received the signals. It happened 130 million years ago when the dinosaurs were on Earth. They just received the signals at these different places all around the world, and those signals have been traveling at the speed of light for 130 million years. Does anybody want to figure out how far away that was? Now, we have pictures from Hubble spacecraft that's taking pictures of things that supposedly happened 2.4 billion years ago, and we're being fed pictures.
Wow.
And folks, we can't stop killing ourselves or each other. I heard you talking about teens earlier. To make the bridge between psychiatry and medicine, to me, I mean, I consider myself and receive every month for the last 15 years in psychiatry for 48 years, but last 15 years in medicine, in family medicine, because I want to 12, 16 articles a month reviewed. And here's the deal: the anxiety, the levels of anxiety and major depressive disorder have had a startling increase, and suicides in female adolescents since 2005 to 2014. Not so among the males. There's depression, but not the suicide increases. I got a thing yesterday that in 1980, this is only 37 years ago, there was purported to be 0%. It was unheard of. It was a rare occurrence to have type 2 diabetes among adolescents. We have now over 60,000 teenage adolescents with type 2 diabetes. So let me say the principles, because they're going to be the answer. I'm going to say there's one cause to mental illness and physical illness, and that's activation, chronic activation, hours every day of our emergency system, the HPA axis. Those of you that are in the health field, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, to the general public called the stress response, the fight or flight stress response. That response is meant to be activated once every 24 to 72 hours for up to 30 minutes. It is not meant to be activated 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16 hours a day by worry, not by saber-toothed tigers. That's what it used to be. You had nothing but a club, our ancestors, and you had a saber-toothed tiger. You needed your body to give it everything it had. But now, what do people do? Worry, guilt, resentment, unresolved grief, overanalyzing, upset that things aren't the way they want them to be, being driven by their ego and their insecurity rather than guided by an internal state of wisdom, a spiritual force that's with you all times. Why is this relevant? And I'm going to get to it, but Dr. Tom Kelly, who's done most research among the three principles, let me mention the three principles. The three principles, and obviously, if we have what? We have 6 days? No, 7 days? Oh, no, we have 45. Yeah, 40 minutes. So the principles, universal mind. You know, these were. I mean, it's a strange story if you've never heard it. They were discovered. They were, I guess it's something that's already there. They were discovered by Mr. Sidney Banks, and they're metaphors, but they speak to spiritual truths. That universal mind is the intelligent energy of all things, in form or in formless. He called it the great nothingness, that before the Big Bang, there was some intelligent energy in the universe. This man with a 9th grade education who had read 4 welding books in his life, but wrote 10, actually lectured to PhD physicists from MIT 3 different times for 3 days at British Air Electronics, because they kept inviting him back. And he taught physics to PhD physicists from MIT 3 days at a time. I know the head of human resources that was there, Dick Bezoyan. He said it wasn't, because I used to always say it was twice. He said no, they had him back 3 times. Universal mind is the intelligent energy of all things, formless or formed. Divine thought is the gift of divine thought is the gift that we're using every moment to create our lives and our experience and guide us through life. But at the beginning of creation, and even now, it's what brought form into the world from the universal mind. 2 years ago, the Nobel Prize in physics was by 2 people from labs in 2 parts of the world who have shown that creation is actually accelerating faster and faster.
Mm.
Wow. I know what it's accelerating into. I guess the great nothingness. But it's accelerating faster and faster. universal consciousness. So you divine universal mind, universal thought, universal consciousness. Let's bring this to you and I. We are using these three elements. We are using our mind, which is spiritual. There will be people walking around someday, I hope it's in a few years at least, with a little white box that has Dr. Pettit's brain in it. Nobody's going to be walking around with a little white box with Dr. Pettit's mind in it. I don't care what people tell you. I'm suggesting that the mind is not a product of the brain. It's what's powering the brain. The power source. It's our connection to the divine, to the universal energy of life, if you don't like the word divine. So we have to have a mind. You have to have the power of thought to get through life. If we didn't have this power of thought, I wouldn't have been able to make it to the bathroom this morning when I got out of bed. And you have to have the power of consciousness is the divine gift or the universal gift that allows us to be aware. And what it also does is it takes whatever we think and makes it appear with special effects like it's real. 7 billion people on this planet right now are using mind, thought, and consciousness, including the 18 that are here right now. And not one of us is using those gifts in the same way to create the same experience. Every human being is creating their separate reality because the gift of consciousness is taking their thoughts and making them look real as their separate reality. Why is it important to understand this? I'll tell you one of the reasons why it's important. There's a researcher, a positive psychology researcher, and wouldn't you know, my mind is blanking on him right now. Some of you might, it'll come to me or it won't. But he was researched, and I've read the abstracts of his articles from 2007 to 2015. And what he did is he went all through over the United States, and he has a survey that he uses, and people fill it out, and he arbitrarily then has cutoffs. Now, you know there's a range in each one of these three areas, and he cut off, this is all across the United States, different socioeconomic, different educational. And they fill out these forms, and their answers, then they are placed in one of three areas. The first area is thriving. People are thriving. The second area is people are stressed. Somebody mentioned the word stress. They'd say, I'm okay, but I'm really stressed. I'm okay, but I'm significantly stressed every day of my life. And somebody to me in an earlier presentation I did for people in Denmark, actually earlier this morning, somebody wanted to be normal. And I said, you don't want to be normal. Normal is the bell curve. The average person is stressed about 65 to 75% of every day, 70% or more stressed. That's what's normal. You don't want to be normal. You want to be healthy. So the second group is stressed. The third group is languishing. These are people who are overwhelmed, who are not making it, who are having periodic thoughts of killing themselves or others, or setting up a hotel room with automatic weapons and seeing how many people you can kill before you're killed yourself, or going into a university and barricading the doors with chains and then opening up fire with every bit of guns you have. You have to be hurting pretty bad to do that, folks. Only hurting people hurt people. You don't have to believe that. It's what I say. So thriving, I'm going to give you the statistics. I could let somebody guess, but because of time, I'm just going to tell you. Thriving, 18%. About 1 in 6 people thriving in a good state of mental health, with hardiness, with high levels of resilience, with joy and a light heart going through life. Even if they take on a little stress, very resilient, coming back fully, quickly. Even with significant things, deaths in families, sudden economic shifts, layoffs at work. 18%. Stressed, 50%. I'm okay, but I'm really, really stressed. Those are the people that are maybe, maybe occasionally being, somebody said about infidelity, maybe stealing a little bit from their company, maybe drinking a little, using a little too much wine at the bottom part. They're stressed. They're just trying to make it, but they're still making it. Okay, they look like everybody's doing okay. The languishing people, 32%, folks.
Wow.
That's almost 1/3 people that are overwhelmed. And we wonder why we have policemen that have lighter melatonin killing people that are unarmed that are African Americans. And we wonder why then we have African American people luring white policemen into a slaughter. We wonder why we have people running for mayor of New York that are exposing their genitals to 15-year-old girls. Now, we can easily be in judgment of people. I happen to believe that there's a truth that, as Mr. Banks says, lostness is innocent. It's innocent. People are doing the best that they know given the level of psychological and spiritual understanding that they're at. You don't have to believe that. I'm just saying that that's what's true for me. So anyway, Tom Kelly, the PhD researcher from Wayne State University in Detroit, said, boy, that's not my experience of people that have been studying the three principles. So he sent out those same forms. Now, it's not good research. It's not double blind. It's not even the same. He sent them out to different centers in London, in California, in Minneapolis, some of the centers where there's been large groups of people. And I think he had just under 200 responses. And the responses were, instead of 18% thriving, 88%. Now, these were people with 9.4 years of experience average studying the principles. 18%, 9% stressed, 1 out of 11, and 3% languishing.
Wow.
And I asked people, think of what they physiologically, emotionally, psychologically, think what your family, each one of your own individual families would be if 88% of your family was thriving. Think of what your community, if 88% of your community was thriving. Think if 88% of your state, or in Canada, gosh, I'm blanking. What do they call it in Canada?
Provinces.
Province, yeah. Think if 88% of the world was thriving. Before long, it would be closer to 100%, because those that were thriving would do anything they could to reach out and give a hand to those that weren't. So I know I'm aware of the time. I'm going to keep going. So here's the things that happen. Now, some of I can go fairly fast with this because we've got a lot of health professionals here, nurses. Here's the 4, and this is simplified. When the HPA axis gets activated, all kinds of things happen. But I'm going to divide it up into 5 things, 4 of which are old. There's a new one. Norepinephrine, massive amounts of norepinephrine, massive amounts of epinephrine. Our clotting increases. Why? If you've got nothing but a club and you've got a saber-toothed tiger, if he gets part of your shoulder and you're able to stun him and get away, you want to be a hyperclottable. You want to be able to put pressure on a fairly large wound and get it to clot. But what happens now? Norepinephrine, epinephrine clotting. If I'm spending 8 to 12 hours a day activating the HPA axis, strokes, heart attacks, deep vein thrombosis. It was not an accident that Hubert Humphrey got that Nixon got a deep vein thrombosis within 48 hours after resigning in disgrace. Blood sugar, every massive amounts of glucagon is released from the liver. Every molecule of glucagon releases 100 million molecules of glucose into the bloodstream. And then we wonder why we have this incredible spike of type 2 diabetes. People are blaming it on McDonald's. Well, it could be partially true because when people are stressed, they go to comfort food. But also, the massive release of glucose into the bloodstream puts such a load on the pancreas that eventually the pancreas says, I can't do this anymore. I'm beaten. You win. And you start to get your blood sugar and your hemoglobin A1C starts going up, up, up. Immune function. If you're fighting a saber-toothed tiger, you're not going to have to worry about getting cancer or getting an infection. If he eats you, it's over. You don't have to worry about that. But if you're doing it just because you're stewing, worrying about your mom's breast cancer, your dad's alcoholism, your grandson's drug abuse, and you're stressing yourself out 8, 10, 12 hours a day, you're going to knock out, and those of you, many of you have probably read Robert Sapolsky from Stanford's book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a great read. He's funny. He's brilliant. He says that our immune function with chronic mental stress gets knocked out 40 to 70%. And what happens then? We get the macrophages, the T cells, all this stuff. You get an increase in bacterial infections, viral infections, cancers, wound healing from a surgery or from an injury. And please don't blame. It's not about blaming ourselves if we've had any of those. We're human beings. I went in and out of clinical depression for 21 years because I was spending 6 to 9 hours a day doing this to myself and my body. 21 years. I saw 6 psychiatrists. They were really nice people, but not one of them taught me how to live in the present moment with a light heart. That was Mr. Banks that taught me that. Inflammatory cytokines and free radicals are massively needed when your father's jack has just come down on his chest and you're 5'2" and 130 pounds and you have to lift up the car to save his life. It just happened about 6 months ago with my niece's husband, and his 5'2" 130-pound son picked up the car and a neighbor grabbed him and pulled him out with only minor injuries. It took massive releases of inflammatory cytokines and free radicals for him to do that. But if you're doing that chronically, almost every disease has, you look up, high inflammation. Even tinnitus in the ear, the present theory is that it's the body screaming out that your whole body has a jacked up inflammatory response. Let alone lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, all the bowel disease, migraine headaches. Go on and on and on. Most of the ICD-10. The latest one is gut dysbiosis. And there's a wonderful book. She was 30 years ahead of her time, Candace Pert, who was a friend of mine and died a few years ago. How many people have read Molecules of Emotion? Okay, great. Well, Candace was on to something, and she was a great great researcher. There's 3 to 5 times more neuro connections, synapses in the gut than there is in the brain. I think it's 300 to 500% more. And if you get dysfunctional, I've got a picture here. If you get in chronic state of stress, you get dysfunctional HPA axis, you get increased pain perception. You start experiencing pain at levels of pain input that nobody else experiences pain. That's why you see the fibromyalgia. And that's why also in chronic back pain and neck pain, it's a huge component of it. It's real. It's a real experience. But it's because the perception of pain has been altered. And that's why I've had many patients through my 34 years that came to a deeper and deeper understanding of these 3 universal principles and went from having narcotics for their fibromyalgia to an occasional Tylenol. It's real, folks. So it says here, you get dysbiosis in the gut. It affects the microbiota. It affects catecholamines, neurotransmitters, GABA, serotonin, norepinephrine. You get overt inflammation. It leads to tissue damage, and it leads to illness. There is one cause of mental illness and most physical illness, and it is chronic mental stress. All the diagnoses, those of you, I think Lynn might have it, but if not, Lynn, I'll give it to you and you can get it out to people. I'm doing, in fact, Thursday is my 5th of 13 podcasts that I'm doing for a program in the United Kingdom called the Real Change Portal. And it started with one cause, one cure. Then it went to anxiety disorders, stories of hope, depressive disorders, physical disorders, personality disorders, and this Thursday is on PTSD. And it's about people that in my 34 years had all those labels that came to a deep level of peace and regained their mental well-being. It's always there. I'm suggesting to you there is a place of mental well-being, and I obviously don't have the time to tell all those stories, but that cannot be damaged. It cannot even be scratched because it is spiritual. So I'm going to stop now because of the time and take some questions or comments. Or it's such a short period of time. I apologize if I talked too fast, or probably was just trying to share as much as I could in the time.
I went ahead and unmuted everyone, so if you could just raise your hand so people know you're about to speak. Okay, Cheryl Router.
I was really interested in that because I have unwittingly used many of those principles without realizing it. I'm actually an 18-year cancer survivor, and as I was going through the process of that, I used a lot of mind-body therapies that I could find, and I've since then also learned of it's actually a really wonderful program, particularly for people who are struggling with trying to kind of get their mind calmed down. It's called M-Wave, and it actually helps you relearn how to have your mind in a balanced state. But the whole mind-body connection has always been a huge focus of mine because they really can't be separated, ever.
The same energy in a different disguise. Cheryl, all I would say about the principles, these universal principles, is that you use them, everybody's using them, just like we use gravity.
Yeah.
But it's not about, I mean, they just are. Every human being is creating their experience from the inside out, one thought at a time. I finally, at 75 years of age, read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. People know him probably. He was the psychiatrist who was in the death camp for 3.5 years, and his pregnant wife, of course, died. His parents killed by the Germans. And I love one of my favorite sayings of him, and it may have come from you, Lynn, I don't know who it was, is there is a space between the stimulus and the response. Between the stimulus and our response, there is a space. And it is in that space that our freedom lies. Now, my experience is that people that understand these principles, they access that space much more often than people that don't. And it's about insights into the spiritual nature of life. And Mr. Banks was never one to tell people not to meditate. But he said what you're looking for is to live in a meditative state. And you don't get there via techniques. You get there via understanding. He also said there's an infinite number of doors into the nature, understanding the spiritual nature of these three principles. And I tell people the last time I looked at my math book, infinite was a really, really big number.
Yeah.
Every time I feel emotional pain, I now get excited. For 21 years until I was 41, I did not get excited when I felt emotional pain. I got terrified that I was headed down into the depths of another depression. And because I got terrified and didn't have understanding, I did lead myself down. And then when I got to the basement, I said, see, I was right. Now, why do I get excited when I have emotional pain? Because to me, in my understanding, I know there is one person in this entire world that can create emotional pain for me. And they're in the same underpants that I'm in. And the last time I looked, there's only room for one of us. Now, knowing that, I don't look outside of me to find out the cause of my emotional pain. And I know that I'm innocently, hear that word, like I did for 21 years, I'm innocently using mind, thought, and consciousness in a way that is creating emotional pain for me. And if that I can leave my thinking alone, if I can leave my thinking alone and make that space a little bigger, wisdom will, divine, universal mind in the form of wisdom will come through, and I will have insights into the nature of these principles. I will go through a couple of more of those infinite number of doors that may prepare me for the loss of a child in a car accident 3 months from now. Who knows what?
God forbid.
It happens for all of us. Life is and then we die. You either live a lighthearted, joyful, loving life and then die, or you live a stressed out, tormented, holding on to the past, worrying about the future, and then you die. So why not make the choice? And it's not a willful choice. It takes going towards understanding. But my friend, I'll tell a quick story because it's worthwhile. I think I can do it quick. My friend Beverly from California was in a housing project. She was in an African-American housing project. She had failed 12 treatments for heroin addiction. She admitted that she was physically abusing her 9 and 10-year-old girl almost on a daily basis. She did not have a GED. Dr. Roger Mills came with the 3 principles. This is in the late 80s to the housing project that she was in. I will tell you this, she now has a master's degree in her own consulting firm. And she's one of the wisest human beings I know. And she was in the back of a room in the Bronx in the early 90s, probably getting her bachelor's degree at the time, but came with Dr. Mills because he had such respect for her. And they were doing a big housing project in the Bronx. And my good friend Judy Sedgman, who I was with at the medical school in West Virginia for nearly 10 years, she was there too. And they had 250 people from a hospital that Judy was consulting with in the Bronx, and 250 people from the Bronx housing project of Rogers. So they had 500 people. They had 3 days they're going to be teaching the principles. And at the beginning of the day, Judy and Roger are brilliant. They were brilliant teachers. Their IQs were in the, 170s, I think. They were brilliant. But they got a little bit too intellectual, and people in the audience got intellectual, and their questions were intellectual, and they were in that analytical mind rather than their intuitive mind. And suddenly Beverly came marching up from the back of the room. Now, I heard this from somebody else, but I asked her 2 years ago if this happened. She said, well, yeah, it did. She came marching up from the back of the room, if you can imagine, and here's Dr. Roger Mills with degrees from Princeton and University of Michigan, and she says, Dr. Mills, would you please sit down? And he sat down because he respected. Miss Sedgman, would you please sit down? She now didn't have her doctorate then, she has her doctorate. Would you please sit down? She turned around to the audience and she said, listen, folks, this is not rocket science. Sometimes you're in your right mind and sometimes you're not. Now you're born to live in your right mind. And she used the G word. She said, that's where God meant for you to be. But he gave you free will. So you can pay attention to whatever thoughts you want to, and nobody can make you stop. So you can think your way away from your right mind into where you're not in your right mind. And if you get there and you want to get back to your right mind, there's 3 things you should really remember. And I'm going to say 4 now, but given what I've seen lately with technology. Number 1, you're not very smart. Everybody's IQ drops to -12 when they're upset. Has anybody seen anybody when they had any intelligence at all when they were upset? I haven't. My 75 years of living, right? Number 1, you're not very bright. Keep your mouth shut. And I would say keep your hand from tweeting and keep your hand from emailing, and don't throw anything, and don't hit anything, and don't hit anybody. And then the last thing, leave your thinking alone as best as you can until you feel better. Leave your thinking alone as best as you can until you feel better. She didn't say, distract yourself from your thinking any way you can. Get those bad thoughts out of your head. She didn't say, try really hard to think positive thoughts and reframe it. She said, leave your thinking alone until you feel better. And before you know it, you will be back in your right mind, because that's where home is.
Oh, Dr. Pettit, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I wanted to say that Dr. Pettit is working on a book. It's a work in progress, and it will be entitled Nothing Broken, Nothing Lacking.
Well, it's actually, we think we're going to have a series, Lynn, of smaller books, 50 to 70 page books.
Wow.
The first one, I think, is going to be Beyond Trauma and Resilience, Finding Freedom from the Past. The second one is going to be One Cause, One Cure. And then it's going to be stories of hope with anxiety disorders, stories of hope with depressive disorders, stories of hope with PTSD, stories of hope with psychotic disorders, stories of hope with physical disorders. We'll have a bunch of smaller books, I think. Otherwise, we'd have a 600-page book.
Yeah, something for everybody. They'll identify with that. Awesome. Awesome.
The last thing I'll say is somebody said they were working with people with infidelity. My wife called me up when she started using these principles, and she had 3 couples within 3 weeks that came. They had divorce papers on the paper on the desk, but they because of one of their infidelity. And after 3 weeks of sessions, she called me. She was 140 miles away. This is in West Virginia, where she'd go and stay overnight at a clinic that she used to work at. And she said, I know these people can't be true. Can this be true? All 3 of these couples came back for their 3rd session to say thank you and to say that they're more in love with each other than they had been since the very first time they met.
Right.
And it was because they had read The Missing Link, they had read the Relationship Handbook, and she had taught them the principles where they saw that the infidelity, it didn't matter who did it, was part of a dance they had been doing innocently for a long time. And then that was the final step of the dance. Or that one or the other was going through a very difficult time, whether it's man or the woman. And what you start to see is the relationship problems are not relationship problems. They're 2 people who are stressed out, innocently bringing out the worst in each other.
Yeah.
Anyway, I will stop.
Oh, man, thank you so much. I just wanted to make one more quick announcement, which is that if you haven't signed up for your CE yet and your evaluation and certificate, that's still available on our website. And you can find the link on the email or Facebook, but it's Centex, CENTEXAHNA.org. And that's where you'll find the link for the registration for the 1 hour of nursing CE. Dr. Pettit, what a joy to be with you tonight. We thank you so much.
Mutual.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, everybody's welcome to say goodbye and thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Good
so
work.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Very enjoyable and very knowledgeable. Thank you.
We need healers.
Very-
Keep
Thank you.
doing it.
Good luck on your move to your new location. Thank
Well,
you.
we now have sold our house in Michigan and we've purchased our house here in Phoenix. So step by
Yes.
step, we're getting settled.
Yay. Very good.
Great.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you. God
Bye-bye.
bless.
Good night.
Bye.
Blessings.
Thank you. Blessings to all of you.